Drake Powell's defense makes him stand out in the 2025 NBA Draft. This is Floor and Ceiling. Let's break him down. Drake Powell was a 5-star recruit and potential top 10 pick in high school, but he had an underwhelming freshman season at North Carolina. It's hard to pin that on Powell, who wasn't given the chance to maximize his draft stock. Regardless, during his only season at Carolina, Powell still showcased his defensive upside and two-way athleticism. Right now, I prefer the 19-year-old's defense to his offense. There, I have questions about how good of a shooter Powell is, how much he can self-create, and whether he's physical enough despite his run and jump ability. The hope also has to be that Powell can go back to showing more flashes off the bounce and really as a guard like he did in high school. This especially applies if you believe in a high-end outcome for Powell as a two-way swingman who can play the 2 and the 3 while knocking down his outside shots, being an aggressive slasher, and playing on the ball more. For now, I'm leaning more towards a median or low outcome where Powell would add most of his value on defense, guarding the point of attack, as well as guards and wings, but maybe lacking the shooting and scoring to be a surefire rotation bet. I'd feel good drafting Powell in the early second round, although I can see him getting looks starting in the late teens. Before anything else, let's actually dial in on Powell defensively. This end of the floor was where he truly excelled at while at Carolina. But also, defense, both on and off the ball, is where I predict Powell to add the most short-term value to his future NBA team. Looking at the stats, Powell averaged 0.7 steals and blocks per game, combining for a total of 51 stocks in 37 contests. The numbers will ideally see a slight uptick, but Powell is one of those prospects where the tape and the context is particularly important. Watching Powell's games, I saw an NBA level defender who will get stops, be switchable at least 1 through 3, and in a best case outcome will likely be assigned onto some of the league's best ball handlers down the line. Powell is about 6'6" in shoes with a 7-foot wingspan. He moves extremely well, and he's disruptive on the ball with the length to smother or block drives and pull-ups. Powell defends with great lateral quickness, keeping his man in front, and also with a great motor. You can tell that Powell wants to defend, and he relishes making multiple efforts. I also think that the Carolina prospect deserves real credit for his buy-in on this end. Even while barely getting featured on offense, Powell kept a very high motor on defense, which I'm not sure that many 5-star freshmen would do. At this stage, the UNC prospect's biggest limitation is his strength. This is important for his finishing too, as we'll see shortly. Powell came in at 200 pounds at the combine, which means that another 10 to 15 pounds need to be added to his frame. Powell can get moved on drives and dislodged by bumps. Navigating screens is a constant challenge, which he picks up and doesn't have massive problems with, but he would definitely find it easier and less taxing with more muscle. Here, one thing I'll mention is that I'm skeptical about Powell's ability to play the 4 on defense. I'm not sure that he's that big, and he's definitely not strong or physical enough right now. What sets Drake apart from other prospects like Carter Bryant, Cedric Coward, Noah Penda, or even Cooper Flagg is that I'm more confident that they can fill in at the 4. I'm also watching out for Powell's high hips, although not super closely. Still, I feel like his center of gravity isn't low enough sometimes. Regardless though, Powell has a very good shot of being a plus defender on and off the ball. The numbers will have to see an uptick, but I usually like the process. Powell is an awesome and functional vertical athlete with a quick first jump that matches his long arms. The Carolina prospect has a number of two-handed blocks throughout his career, and I expect his rejections to end up on end-of-the-season highlight reels. The 19-year-old adds value as the lowest defender on the floor with how he's diligent at tracking plays and creating events. He'll spot cuts, tag rollers, sink in the dunker spot, etc. Like on the ball though, Powell's physicality has to rev up, particularly when he's chasing around the perimeter and getting clobbered by picks. Drake can also be prone to overhelping sometimes, but not to a worrying extent or even one that is unusual for a freshman. He might be jumpy as well, especially if he finds himself lagging behind the action, but once again, this is nothing out of the ordinary. I'll wrap up by noting that Powell has the foot speed and length to recover when he makes mistakes, but the margins for error naturally go down in the NBA. Overall though, I'm very high on Powell as a defensive prospect, and I think he has a high floor and ceiling. My questions kick in on offense. First, some vital context is needed. Drake Powell was barely featured at UNC, posting a tiny usage rate of 13.3%. He averaged about 7 points, 3 rebounds, and 1 assist this season. Most of the time, he was spotting up off the ball. There, he cashed in on 40% of his catch-and-shoot threes, which is a very good figure. The volume wasn't super high on 90 attempts, and Powell can still take more threes as a whole, but it was decent enough. At the very least, Powell has a safe floor as long as he keeps knocking down his shots from downtown. This is an important swing skill, and to be honest, I remain unsure about Powell's shot for multiple reasons. The first one is his free throw shooting, which hovered around 65% as a freshman. Obviously, that needs to improve, even if it has been better in the past. Then, his track record from downtown is mixed. This season was fine or good, but Powell's percentages have fluctuated in previous settings. For example, he made 50% of his threes during Peach Jam, but he shot 19% from deep during the spring schedule in EYBL play right before that. Finally, I question the versatility and the quickness of Powell's shot. It seems to me like his release is on the slower side with a pronounced dip and with the need to almost exclusively be spotting up. By that, I mean that Powell's makes from deep don't really come off movement, screens, handoffs, things like that. Instead, he needs to be wide open. Still, if Powell's 3 is falling, he's a relatively simple fit. Once he forces a closeout, he has the means to attack the defender and force his rivals into rotation. It starts with Powell's quick first step, and it can end with his explosiveness and body control at the basket. Powell's numbers at the rim this year were great as he finished 67% of his shots there, which ticks up to 68% in the half court. At his best, Powell operates with long steps and acrobatic finishes. This branches out to how he cuts and runs the floor as well. At Carolina, Powell had to rely on his off-ball activity to get touches and buckets. This might carry over to the NBA, although you hope that Powell can eventually do more. Still, he'll get easy points by leaking out ahead of everyone, catching and finishing, for example. Or he'll cut from the corner and throw down the lob. At this stage, I think that Powell's short-term path to carving out an NBA role will be off the ball, and thinking about fits, a team with reliable table setters and a fast pace could really get the most out of his athleticism and finishing. Powell's body control is enticing, but he needs to play with more physicality. For instance, I thought he didn't draw enough free throws. Drake can also attack a closeout into a jumper, usually a step back of some sort. I think he's more comfortable from the mid-range than from 3 right now though. His process off the catch into a pull-up doesn't always look natural either, but there's been just about enough flashes. I prefer Powell as a slasher, although this wasn't really his role at Carolina. I think Drake has more on-ball juice than what he was able to show. Powell needs to keep refining his handle and finishing, but he can blow by defenders and score with either explosion or touch. There hasn't been enough volume yet for me to buy in all the way, and I'm not sure about his handle most of all, but the upside does exist in the half court and in transition. Powell's tools fit the open court very well, and he could be a lot of fun, like I said, on a team that plays fast. In a lower end outcome, these skills are applicable to how Powell can attack closeouts. What I'm unsure of, once again, is his physicality. Powell is pretty contact avoidant, which is a struggle in today's NBA, where strength is super important for prospects coming out of college. Then, I also find Powell to be slightly caught between the 2 and the 3. His highest case scenario on offense is at the 2, but his dribbling, passing, and shooting probably still need substantial improvements. For now, I consider Powell to be more of a swingman or a wing than a guard, which is also why he's closer to 30 than 20 on my board. If Powell fleshes out his on-ball juice, then I'll have been too low on him. This didn't happen at North Carolina, but I don't think the chance ever really existed for Powell because of his role. Instead, I expect that NBA teams will comb through his previous EYBL and high school games. As a slasher, Powell did everything that I mentioned earlier, except that, very importantly, it came on much higher volume and he played on the ball far more. Like he's flashed, the UNC prospect can blow by a defender and throw down a big dunk. Pulling up, Powell likes to play around the elbows, sometimes after a crossover to his right hand. I don't consider his handle to be dynamic, but he does alright to avoid getting into jammy situations. These flashes are certainly interesting, but I doubt that they'll carry over immediately, especially after a year stashed away. So whether these on-ball reps initially come in the G League or in the NBA will depend on where Powell lands in the draft. For example, I could see Drake getting some run as a rookie on the Nets or the Wizards, but not really on the Clippers, Timberwolves, Celtics, or Sixers. I'm less sure about Powell's passing than about his scoring. Predictably, there was virtually no volume of this at Carolina. He was almost exclusively a play finisher, so Powell posted 1.1 assists to 0.7 turnovers per game, with very small advanced numbers in both categories. The good news, as I mentioned earlier, is that Drake doesn't really turn the ball over either. Going forward, if he is to play off the ball, which I think will be the case early on, then he'll need to make the correct and quick decision after attacking off the catch. On the ball, Powell showed at previous levels that he could make some basic reads, maybe he could even make some reads versus 2 on the ball, but I'm not really overthinking these. Still, it's worth pointing out that he averaged between 3 and 4 assists during his entire high school career, so taking that into consideration with his assist to turnover ratio, it does seem like Powell can make the right pass to some extent.